Why Jesus never laughs, you might ask. In this video, I will offer my answer to the question of Jesus and the absence of laughter in the Gospels. Now, you might think that a prophet or a religious figure, being someone who speaks the word of God, is expected not to laugh. But this is not as common as you might believe. For example, Muhammad laughed numerous times. Zoroaster, the prophet of Ahura Mazda, has also laughed. We also have the statue of Laughing Buddha coming from Chinese folktales in the 10th century. Now, I won't explore the symbolic significance of laughter and what an absence of it in the Gospels would imply. This would lead me to contrast Nietzsche's philosophy of dance and laughter against the spirit of gravity, a metaphysical age represented by Christianity. Rather, I want to explore the question of why Jesus could have never laughed, given the ontological parameters of Christianity. The only time Jesus is known to laugh is in Judas' non-canonical Gnostic Gospel, where his laughter is more a sign of contempt, pointing to his disciples' ignorance. Answering this question can only scratch the surface of Christianity's one major property, namely its hyperactive or hypertrophied sense of self-control, orderliness, and hypercontextuality. For this undergoing, I want to briefly explain the theory of what generates laughter, which comes from a very obscure Soviet paper about the mechanism of laughter. Here, the authors present the evolutionary model of why humans evolved the ability to laugh. According to the paper, laughter is a consequence of humans being selected for quick decision-making about what one is perceiving at a given moment. Quick decision-making is then a consequence of our brains being prediction-making machines. When we are introduced to the information, be it verbal or visual, our brain makes a sequence of pathways about the possible endpoint or route that the specific information will follow. So, for example, while reading a book or listening to a friend tell you a story, your brain constructs simultaneous divergent conceptual trajectories about the possible meaning of the words. This is done by attributing certain images to certain symbols. Now, the laughter, according to paper, results from the deletion of the false understanding of what you are presented with, as after the story took a curveball, turns out that incorrect understanding of the information was transmitted to consciousness, and now it has to be substituted by the one that was left in the operative memory. The act of deletion produces motor convulsions, which dissipates energy in the form of repetitive epileptic-like motion known as laughter. This theory explains the importance of timing when making a joke. You have to let the listener construct a possible trajectory of how the story is going to end, so that he can become emotionally invested in his prediction. Note that the process of assigning probabilities to multiple predictions that your brain makes is unconscious. The one that is the most probable will be transmitted to consciousness, and the delay between the transmission and the path that leads to that point is perceived as a thought. Hence, in order for laughter to arise, a false understanding of the information should be transmitted to consciousness. Now, the emotional disposition is also important, as in order for laughter to take place, the curveball has to be safe and not pose a danger to the organism's survival. Here's an example. My uncle William has a new cedar chest. So, last time I saw him, he just had a wooden leg. This joke produces a humorous effect as a consequence of commuting two mutually exclusive images. Chest is first realized as a box, hence the false segment of a trajectory is transmitted to consciousness. However, because we are introduced to the word leg, our understanding has to be deleted and substituted by the one that was left in the operative memory. Hence, a good joke will make your brain transmit a false understanding of the possible meaning of symbols into consciousness. So, to make it clear, the brain produces different possible trajectories but ascribes the highest probability to one certain trajectory and keeps the other ones in operative memory. When one prediction is transmitted to consciousness and turns out to be incorrect, it then has to be replaced by the other one. On a psychological level, this substitution will be perceived as an interference of two incompatible versions, chest as a box and chest as a body part in this case. Now, this also explains why tickling should be done by another person, because if you're tickling yourself, then your brain makes correct predictions about the next possible location of irritation of skin, and hence it doesn't need to delete false predictions. In an alternative world where laughter has not evolved, two things could have happened. First, the prediction the brain makes about the meaning of a certain piece of information, be it a word or a visual image, should not be transmitted to consciousness until everything becomes clear and all other possible predictions are discarded. The second option is to quicken the transmission of the most probable prediction by simultaneously rejecting the opposite one. As authors claim, in the first case the time the information reaches consciousness is delayed, and in the second case the brain resources are not completely used, so nature resolves this problem at the cost of psychological confusion. In the world of Savannah, prolonging the process of attaching a specific meaning to a specific image won't be adaptive. It is more convenient to think that the moving bush is a lion because you have nothing to lose. As a result, the proper timing in judging and deciding the worth of given information was critical to human evolution. Hence, people who take long time to decide whether they are seeing a predator or not would be eaten, and the ones who would be extremely quick at transmitting one prediction and simultaneously deleting the other one would confuse every bush with a predator and would be incapable of quality decision making. Now, my setting up a naturalistic theory of laughter that has to do with evolution and brain function doesn't aim at naturalizing and biologizing Christianity. Quite the contrary, I want to use this medium as a sort of metaphor to make a point about a major philosophical property of Christianity. Jesus can never laugh simply because the ontological properties of Christianity doesn't allow for contingencies to take place. Now, you see, in sociology there is a theory that socio-political organization, which includes institutions, ministries, laws, infrastructure, the educational system, and all host of other organizational units, is primarily aimed at limiting contingencies. Now, you wake up, scroll on your phone, go to the toilet, and have a breakfast, let's say. Now, how many possible trajectories could your life take? How many means of transportation or media for engaging in communication are you offered? How many options do you really have? You see, the more organized your life is and the more organized society is on top of that, the less room there is for contingencies. A contingency in this case is the opposite of necessity, something that can take place unexpectedly, incidentally, and accidentally. As there is an open-ended plurality of causal pathways in a social space, the more organized and structured your life is, the fewer deletions of false decisions will be necessary. Hence, your life becomes more linear and straightforward. Thus, we get to an opposition of being in control and of being in charge, as opposed to being surrendered to the world of chance and world of unexpectancy. The more contingencies there are, the more anxious your life gets. For example, in the Old Testament, Abraham is struck with the horror of contingency. All of a sudden, he has to sacrifice his son to God. I would argue that the very anxiety of contingency that Abraham experiences is resolved by his putting infinite faith in God, as Kierkegaard claims. By being the knight of faith, one professes the belief that what he is told by God cannot be an accident or a contingency. Now, mentioning the concept of the knight of faith, I want to make a brief digression on a very disturbing yet philosophically loaded film by Polish director Andrzej Zulawski, The Possession. Other than the crisis of relationship, divorce, jealousy, and other associated themes, the film offers a deep understanding of what it means to be possessed by an evil force. Here, a protagonist named Anna, who is being possessed and devoured by an alien monstrosity, undergoes a radical change in a very circumscribed fashion. The more possessed she is, the less orderly and more chaotic her life becomes. The hell breaks loose and every aspect of life slips from the control and the grip of the prefrontal cortex, the decision-making and controlling Apollonian filter that we have evolved. When the possession as such reaches its limit, as the protagonist herself describes, the sister of faith leaves her body and the sister of chance takes over. In other words, two forces were operating in her, the force of chance and the force of faith. And in virtue of her being possessed by the evil force, the chance overtakes and thus her life becomes more involuntary. The involuntariness, which is another property of laughter, becomes the essence of her life. Unexpected screams, motions, and decisions saturate every fiber of her being. Now, this film obviously deserves another video, but the point that I'm trying to make is that there is a linear relationship between the predictive nature of the Gospels, whereby Jesus has to fulfill the prophecy, and Western civilization's obsession with organization and the focused pathway of life. Max Weber's Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism is a nice illustration of this ethos. The concept of inner-worldly asceticism describes the secularization of the Gospel's hypertrophied sense of self-control and prediction-making. Sociopolitical elements associated with modernity, such as division of labor, the rise of technology, mechanization, and the judgment of one's success through the medium of money are all derivatives of this root feeling, the root feeling of control and prediction making. You see, the miracles that Jesus performed in the Gospels, such as walking on the sea, calming the storm, curing people of leprosy, and bringing the dead back to life, is a war waged against the sister of chance and contingencies that possess the protagonist of this film. And the world of chance and unexpectancy is another characteristic of nature, and thus the war against nature, symbolized by the opposition of the self-controlling essence of the prefrontal cortex against the emotionally driven limbic system, is another characteristic of Western civilization. Now, every such manifestation has its shadow side. Surely, the war against nature was transformed into exploitation, treating nature as a standing reserve, which I guess is a pathological radicalization of the ethos of self-control and of being in charge of one's life. Now, the flip side of laughter and comedy is crying, despair, and tragedy. As comedy and tragedy are two sides of the same coin. There can be no comedian who is not equally versed in the depth of drama and tragedy. Now, the reason why this is the case has to do with the nature of unexpectedness and of a curveball. If the unexpected twist is safe and doesn't pose danger, it is translated as laughter and produces a humorous effect. However, if an unexpectancy such as the death of a beloved person, the complete failure of one's plans, or people taking control over your life takes place, then it becomes a source of tragedy. If you think about it, what can be more devastating than an unexpected intrusion in your life? In other words, the highest form of malfunction of the properly Christian political state would be an unexpected tragic event, which would be a bug in a social system that in turn aims at limiting contingencies. Hence, the social system is in essence a contingency limiting structure that aims at organizing being at every level of analysis. Now, the key distinction between a raiding of your house by terrorists and killing or torturing your family members as opposed to the tragedy of Gospels is the variable of expectedness. The very insistence of the Gospels that Jesus knew beforehand that he was to be crucified doesn't solely serve the exemplification of his divine nature, but has a deeper philosophical layer, namely a pretension that there is no place for contingency in the world of Christian mental consciousness structure. In horror movies, evil or satanic characters are frequently heard laughing, signifying the arrival of contingency in the organized life of a typical Christian household. In Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose, a historical murder mystery which plays out in Italian monastery, explores the absence of laughter in Gospels. Jorge, the oldest monk, who was the force behind the murders and the one who was in charge of the library, was making sure that the lost second book of Aristotle's Poetics, which explores the philosophy of comedy, would never get into anyone's hands. Although his rationale against the force of laughter, namely that it promotes doubt and challenges the truthfulness of Christianity, doesn't resonate with the point of this video, there's still one point that deserves to be mentioned. Jorge argues that Aristotle's materialistic philosophy turns the universe into dull and slimy matter. It is also noteworthy that slime is frequently associated with evil forces, symbolizing a lack of solidity. Hence, Jorge, who debates William of Baskerville, believes that laughter can destabilize society and religion. William, on the other hand, being a person of enlightenment, supports the importance of free thought, flexibility of mind, and the existence of things that cannot be known. In Dostoyevsky's Brothers Karamazov, Ivan tells Alyosha about his prose poem, The Grand Inquisitor. Jesus appears in the town of Spain in the 16th century, right when the Spanish Inquisition is up and running. The cardinal's rejection of Jesus and reprimanding him for not considering the earthly vices of mere human beings is another opposition between contingency and necessity. Here, the cardinal who runs the social system doesn't want the unexpected contingency coming from the sudden appearance of Jesus, who lets people have the freedom of faith, which is another source of contingency. Cardinal, in some sense, considers himself to be more Christian than Jesus himself, as he refuses to disregard mediocre humans who are inflicted with the vice of contingency. Hence, we get an opposition between the Church as a social system that takes its root from the St. Paul, which aims at limiting contingencies, and Jesus' teachings, which include free will and room for contingency. Cardinal's ethos is consistent with Jorge's point, an ethos that aims at preserving order and deterministic social system, irrespective of its ethical consequences. freedom, the free intellect, and science will lead them into such labyrinths and bring them up against such miracles and unfathomable mysteries that some of them, the disobedient and ferocious ones, will destroy themselves. Hence, the primordial opposition between Jorge and William is between a hypertrophied sense of order on the one hand and the sense of necessary flexibility along with the contingency on the other hand, which is indispensable for creativity and change. Now, the problem with either of those views is the following. The complete absence of laughter ushers us into totalitarianism, and the complete rejection of authority and solidity gets you to the current state of society, which has lost its identity and the connecting thread with its culture's core values and traditions. I believe that the current state of Western civilization is a radicalized version of William's approach, where free discussion turns against itself and undermines the very soil in which free thought, literacy, and intellectual discussion had been born. The properly Western values of intellectuality, literacy, monogamy, and social order are under attack by every dominant socio-political identity group. Either you hear that books are stupid and you should be concerned with money and have multiple women, or you hear that Western civilization is evil and patriarchal and that it deserves to die, along with its philosophy and family values. The so-called conservatives who are supposed to stand against both viewpoints have zero idea what Western civilization is and have also lost self-respect, which is exemplified by new pro-Russian trend that is popular in right-wing communities. Hence, the laughter that I witness in modern society has nothing to do with philosophically mature Nietzschean sense of lightness, but has everything to do with pack of hyenas surrounding and giggling against the old grizzled West, which has entered into its winter phase. However, as I said in my community post, every winter is followed by spring, and I'm sure that hyenas will get back home safely. Hence, the absence of Jesus' laughter as a contingency limiting force is something that Western civilization is in need of. The one who has the monopoly on laughter has all the power. Unfortunately, the modern decentralization of laughter has evolved into the giggling of hyenas.